When she walks away, the first thing she feels is relief, not heartbreak. She exhales like someone who's been carrying weight and finally set it down. In her head, she rewrites the ending as a new beginning. Options, fresh air, a life that suddenly seems larger. The first week looks like proof she did the right thing. There are drinks with friends, curated photos, and a calendar that fills fast. She posts smiles that read like declarations. She flirts, laughs a lot, and keeps her phone lit with messages that mean nothing. Those nights are loud on purpose. Noise covers the parts of her that still need stitching. Busy schedules become a buffer between now and the memory of you. She convinces herself excitement equals healing. But energy fades. When the adrenaline softens, empty evenings widen into long rooms of thought. She distracts because distraction is the cheapest form of courage. Routine becomes a mask. A new morning ritual, new routes home, a playlist that replaces old songs. Habit pretends to solve absence, but it only delays it. The truth arrives in the quiet between plans. It slips in during a sudden pause, a cigarette on the balcony, or a taxi ride alone. That's when the questions start, small at first, then louder. Did I make a mistake? Was my rush for freedom actually cowardice disguised as choice? She notices the tiny missing pieces. No more good morning texts, no check-ins about the little annoyances of her day, nobody saving a seat for her laugh. Those small losses feel silly until they don't. The rituals you built together become the architecture of her day, and without them rooms collapse. She didn't need drama to love you, she needed steady. The irony is brutal. What she thought was dull turns out to be the anchor. She begins to test the waters of memory, fishing for fragments that make sense. She remembers how your calm smoothed her panic and how your presence made noise stop meaning anything. Comparison sneaks in like a thief. Every brief thrill is measured against the slow, reliable weight you carried. She realizes replacements are surfaces without depth. And the more she lines experiences up against what you were, the more hollow the other options look. Pride fights humility, so she hides the ache with humor and deflection. Pride says you deserved it, that leaving was courage. Regret whispers otherwise. When the mirror reflects midnight thoughts she pretends she doesn't have, panic surfaces. The sudden lack of your attention becomes a presence in itself. Her imagination begins to populate absence with scenarios she both fears and secretly hopes are true. This is not immediate heartbreak. It is the slow unmasking of what she lost when the lights dim and there is no one to share the silence. Your absence starts to occupy the same space your presence once held. Silence sharpens memory until it bleeds into longing. And in that slow shift, relief curdles into something far more complicated, real, persistent, and quietly unbearable. She fills every hour with motion to avoid the moment the night shrinks. Plans stack like plates to catch the fragments she refuses to hold. She schedules her days so thinking becomes an inconvenient side effect. Friends become co-conspirators in a campaign of distraction. She laughs louder than she means to and keeps the conversation light. If anyone asks, she offers polished answers that sound like confidence. Beneath the surface, a different script rewrites itself. Appetite for novelty masks the absence that used to be ordinary. New phone numbers glitter like temporary talismans. She flirts not to feel desired but to test whether she still can be. The thrill is short-lived and leaves a residue of doubt. She jumps into situations that promise change but deliver only shallow dopamine. The first months are a rehearsed performance designed to prove stability to herself. But the rehearsal tires her. Energy spent avoiding thought becomes energy that must be replenished. When the social engine idles, small fissures appear. A walk alone becomes a corridor of memories. She notices the empty habit loops that once contained you. Where your voice used to fit naturally, there is silence that demands interpretation. She starts cataloging what she misses like an inventory of loss. It begins with ordinary things, the way you handled logistics, the quiet ways you kept her safe. Those items feel astonishing in their ordinariness. Distraction cannot replace ritual. She tries substitution. Another laugh, another date, another midnight text. Each attempt highlights what cannot be copied. You offered steadiness. Others bring motion. She learns that excitement fades but steadiness becomes a standard. Guilt creeps into her list of accomplishments. She wonders if freedom was bravado and whether leaving was a vanity project. This doubt breeds a restlessness that is not the same as longing. Restlessness feels like a hunger without a name. It pushes her toward busyness and away from introspection. But avoidance has its limits. Facing herself becomes unavoidable in quieter moments. She experiences small surprises of sadness. A song, a scent, a street corner, cues that initiate reckoning. Each cue pierces the armor she donned to look unbothered. Pride resists apology, so she invents reasons for her feelings. Blame shifts outward until it cannot anymore. Reality arrives in the form of inconvenient truths about what she really wanted. Those truths are heavy and immediate. She realizes companionship had a pattern she mistook for boredom. She recognizes the difference between being entertained and being known. This recognition is destabilizing. It forces a reassessment of identity built around the idea of moving on. The busier she becomes, the more the quiet accumulates in the corners of her life. Eventually she understands that motion is temporary and meaning is not. That acceptance is subtle and terrifying. It begins the slow work of remorse, and remorse is louder than any party. Remorse makes her honest about choices she once defended. And in that honesty the pretense falters, leaving room for regret to grow. She stops pretending she is invulnerable and starts making small corrections to a life that now feels incomplete and fragile. At first, what she misses looks tidy and manageable. She notices the small mechanics of your life together, the predictable messages, the little check-ins, the way your presence mapped out her day. Those absences are easy to name because they sit on the surface. They are habits unplugged. She misses a routine the way she misses a coffee shop that closed down, a familiar comfort she took for granted until it was gone. Missing a ritual is not the same as missing a person. Routines are scaffolding. They cradle ordinary days. When they disappear, the loss feels practical. No one asks about the errands, no one remembers the anniversaries of trivial things. The brain catalogs these omissions like a to-do list with crossed-out tasks. She feels inconvenience first, then an odd emptiness where small cares used to fit. This cataloging is mechanical. She checks off absent items. No morning voice notes, no safe presence during rough meetings, no one to split a quiet meal with. Each crossed item nags at her but can be rationalized as mere adjustment. She tells herself she can create new patterns, new rituals to fill the blank spaces, and for a while that seems plausible. Deeper missing creeps in later, quieter and more dangerous. It does not announce itself with headlines. It arrives in the body, a hollow behind the breastbone, a subtle clenched jaw, nights that stretch longer than they should. Those sensations are not about logistics. They are linked to the way someone made her feel at bedrock level. Seen, steadied, understood without explanation. That kind of absence rewires routine into yearning. Suddenly the small conveniences become signs of something larger. Memory amplifies the small into the sacred. An ordinary gesture, the way you tilted your head when you were listening, replays until it feels like evidence of a different life. Mundane moments collect a glow they lacked before. This is not nostalgia trimmed for comfort. It is memory weaponized by loneliness. She starts to measure everything against that glow, and ordinary people begin to look less like replacements and more like echoes. Withdrawal takes a physical shape. She checks her phone with a frequency that surprises her. The impulse to text rises then recedes. Pride or fear stops her. Those impulses are biological, not strategic. Her body misses regulation more than the person, the rhythm of being known. Sleep fragments. Appetite shifts. Mornings feel off-kilter because the anchor that held her mood steady is absent. Comparison becomes a filter. Casual dates, easy conversations, electric moments, they are judged against a standard she didn't know she had. The standard is not perfect, it is deeper. She recognizes that the actual loss isn't only who he was, but who she was when she was with him. Calmer, less defensive, more whole. That realization is disorienting and sharpens longing into an ache that is more hunger than memory. At that point, missing stops being a list of crossed-off habits and becomes an urgent force that colors every small decision until patience or pride yields first eventually. Comparison is the enemy of denial, and she learns that fast. She lines up strangers like contestants in a show she can judge. At first the comparisons are casual, almost curious experiments. Then they harden into a measuring stick she cannot put down. Every new voice is tested against the silence you left behind. Small talk is weighed and found wanting. A flashy compliment bounces off her because it lacks depth. She begins to catalog what truly mattered, and it is not drama. The bar she remembers is not higher, just different and steadier. She notices gestures that were invisible before now shining like evidence. Inside jokes gain weight retroactively, timing becomes proof of connection. Men who rush feel juvenile in the face of what you offered. Availability becomes a flaw if it comes without backbone. She recognizes that eagerness can feel like hunger, not affection. Subtlety becomes the new standard against which fools are measured. Presence without need becomes rare and suddenly precious. She tests every interaction for the quiet she now craves. Conversations that skim surfaces leave her cold and restless. Depth is no longer negotiable, it is the criterion for presence. That realization does uncomfortable work on her pride. Pride protests, then recalculates in the quiet moments alone. Her social feed turns into a silent jury of choices. She catches herself comparing laughter, voice timbre, and temper. Even shared silences with others are measured against your calm. She starts to see how often she dismissed stability as boring. Disrespect is a red flag she now spots immediately and recoils from. She notices patterns she once winked at and now would not tolerate. Boundary violations that seemed small before now feel like exile. Her standards shift from excitement-based to foundation-based. That shift narrows her options and exposes the scarcity of depth. Scarcity breeds urgency where she once felt abundant. Urgency makes her question whether she traded long-term value for short-term thrill. Regret sharpens each comparison until choices feel like losses. She experiments with returning to old haunts to test the pull. Those visits act like mirrors reflecting how present you used to be. She hears your laugh in crowded rooms and it lands like a bell. Random reminders become proofs of what consistency used to deliver. Comparison doesn't only judge others, it judges her decisions too. She wonders if pride blindfolded her to the steady truths. Reflection brings a list of small apologies she never learned to give. Each memory becomes a lesson on what she underestimated about quiet strength. She starts to measure men by whether they steady her nervous system. Emotional maturity becomes a scarce and therefore magnetizing trait. She sees through theatrical charm and into the absence beneath it. That vision forces a reckoning with the version of herself built on escape. She now rejects temporary highs for the safety of reliability. The cost of chasing novelty becomes clearer with every passing date. Comparison becomes a cruel but honest teacher of value and loss. It teaches her not to romanticize chaos anymore, but to grieve it properly. Silence shows her what really matters most. She doesn't crave fireworks, she aches for the ordinary rhythms you kept. The little acts you treated as routine now look like evidence of care. A quiet table for two, a phone call that lasted longer than the news, the way you made grocery runs feel like tending to a tiny kingdom. These details accumulate into a life she suddenly misses. You were not spectacular every minute, but you were consistently present when it mattered. That consistency was a kind of currency she spent without counting. Now it's gone and she notices the interest on what she once took for granted. Every mundane favor becomes a memory with weight. She remembers how your presence softened arguments and stopped escalation from becoming an earthquake. She remembers that you stayed when others might have left mid-storm. Those steady gestures morph from invisible to indispensable. Other people offer spectacle, you offered ballast. When the novelty fades, ballast is the thing that keeps a person upright. She realizes that excitement is a flight, steadiness is a home. Simple comforts, someone showing up when they said they would, listening without an agenda, a predictable routine of care, start to define what she truly valued. The small rituals create a structure to lean on during messy days. Without them, normal life begins to feel unmoored. She notices the lack in the tiny seconds. The meal you heated, the playlist you curated, the joke that only you understood. Those seconds become evidence that intimacy is built from repetition, not spectacle. Attempts to replace these moments with dramatic gestures feel hollow. A man can buy a moment of attention but cannot purchase the slow accumulation of trust. She tries to simulate calm with noise but finds the imitation fragile. Even familiar places trigger vacancy. The booth you favored at that diner echoes with absence. Objects become time capsules of the comfortable rhythm you created together. A sweater folded neatly on a chair becomes a map of evenings that no longer exist. The ordinariness she once dismissed grows luminous when it stops happening. She starts to crave the way you gave permission for stillness, the right to be quiet without being abandoned. That permission was a rare kind of bravery. It required you to tolerate discomfort without vanishing. She never thanked you for that bravery because it simply felt safe. Now safety looks precious and expensive. She catches herself cataloging the micro-actions that used to slip by unnoticed. How you called just to hear about a small victory. How you sat through her bad moods without trying to fix them. Those items form a ledger of what she forfeited. Recognition settles in slowly, then all at once. The ordinary becomes the standard she cannot forget. When routine is gone, loneliness fills the ordinary spaces in ways partying never will. She learns the hard truth. Stability is not boring, it is rare, and its absence teaches regret with brutal clarity. She may cover it with bravado, but the empty hours self-report the loss. Eventually those hours demand a reckoning she cannot postpone and face it. She assumes your quiet will break. Busy life, focused time, plausible excuses. Then she notices the pattern. Shorter replies, fewer messages, no casual check-ins. The silence is more than absent noise, it speaks. The recognition lands hard. Fear grows in the margins. It starts as unease and becomes something that interrupts her sleep. Seeing you calm and composed from afar reads like evidence. Your steady days make her panic because they suggest you are not waiting. What once felt temporary now smells final. Her imagination stops being generous. It constructs endings and executes them in scenes she cannot control. She rehearses apologies she never planned to give. She scripts encounters that either redeem her or humiliate her, and both possibilities feel unbearable. The mind prefers certainty even if the certainty is cold. External signals push the panic further. Friends who mention your routines, a photo that shows you content. These small proofs accumulate. Social fragments become a dossier. Each update she sees that lacks longing compounds the realization. Your life is moving on without her. Control was an anchor. Losing it uproots her. Without the illusion that she can pull levers and coax you back, she faces a raw truth. Her choices have consequences. That truth jolts identity because part of her had been defined by how she could command attention. Stripped of that, she has to reckon with who she is when no one is performing for her. Strategy replaces denial. She experiments with subtle signals, like a comment, a casual question through a mutual. These moves are calibrated tests, small probes to measure the temperature of the door. Anxiety turns them into rituals that feel urgent and slightly ridiculous. They are attempts to make an uncertain world predictable again. Indifference becomes a mirror. If you truly do not seek her, then her power is reduced to a memory. The possibility that you chose peace over pursuit feels like punishment. She imagines you unaffected, free, and the image cuts deeper than reproach. That picture forces a showdown with pride. Regret accelerates when response is absent. Pride that once protected her starts to crumble into calculation. Reaching out might reopen possibility but risks humiliation. Staying silent might preserve dignity but allows the loss to ossify. Neither path promises relief. The choice itself feels like a verdict. This fear is not simply about being alone. It is about losing the version of herself that believed she could walk and remain untouched. She notices the small ways she slides back into old behaviors, eyeing your posts, checking in through mutual friends, imagining scenarios that never happen. Those impulses are evidence that her interior landscape has shifted. In facing this, she begins to see the cost of what she let go. Your absence becomes an axis around which her days rotate. The calm you exhibit becomes the standard she measures life against. That realization brings both sharp pain and a hard clarity. Some things once gone do not return in the same form. The loss is not only about you, it is about the future you erased together. Memories start cropping up like old photos you didn't know you had. They arrive uninvited and vivid, dragging sensory detail with them: a laugh, a smell, the angle of a shoulder. The mind becomes a craftsman, smoothing rough edges and polishing moments until they gleam. Small favors that once slipped by unnoticed now feel like proof of a life she underestimated. She edits out the fights, the petty spats, the times you disappointed her, and leaves the parts that fit the ache. In that edited film you are suddenly larger, kinder, more patient than you sometimes were. This rewritten past becomes a rehearsal for longing. She practices scripts in her head. Imagined conversations, graceful apologies, scenes where she is forgiven and things return to how they felt. Fantasy fills the holes that facts cannot, and it does so convincingly. Every recollection becomes a small reward the brain hands out because coherence tastes safer than chaos. What feels like truth is often a tidy story built to soothe an anxious mind. Nostalgia strengthens the instincts that protect comfort. She begins defending the version of you she curated, praising virtues she once missed and minimizing the parts that hurt. Friends notice the shift. She champions what she once shrugged away and questions choices she once celebrated. That flip can sting, humility and humiliation tangled in the same breath. Regret eats selective memory. She mourns not only for who you were but for who she was with you. Quieter, less reactive, somehow more whole. Missing that self sometimes outweighs missing you. The mirror you held up to her life reflected a version she liked, and losing that mirror is destabilizing. Detail obsession follows. Words you spoke casually become lines she rewinds, proof text for an argument she didn't know she'd make. A private joke turns into evidence that your connection was rare. Ordinary warmth calcifies into proof that what they had was exceptional. These fragments stack into a dossier she carries into sleepless nights. That mental magnification warps present choices. Dates feel judged, conversations tested. She measures tone, restraint, and patience against an ideal inflated by memory. Most encounters fail the test. Failure tightens the loop. Nostalgia feeds comparison, comparison feeds more nostalgia. Responses split. Some try to recreate the past. Some retreat into quiet mourning. A few risk contact and face the chance of rejection. Others let longing calcify into a constant ache. Either path starts in the same place. Memory turned myth. Myths shape impulses, distort judgment, and make forgiveness look like the only exit. This selective remembering is a subtle architect of regret. It elevates small kindnesses into anchors and makes the present feel threadbare by comparison. She learns, too late to soften it, that memory comforts and betrays in the same move. The danger is believing revision, mistaking longing for clarity, and acting on illusions blindly. She becomes a quiet investigator, scanning fragments for patterns that prove or deny your absence. Every public post becomes a piece of evidence. Every mutual comment a potential clue. She traces dates and locations like a detective mapping a timeline she cannot live without. A single harmless photo can spiral into 100 possible explanations in her head. She practices neutral reactions, but her chest tightens when she thinks she's found a signal. Small gestures from strangers suddenly feel staged next to the thought of you. Rather than acceptance, she cultivates scenarios and reads between lines that might not be there. Indirect contact feels safer. A liked picture, a sparing emoji, a comment that toes the line, all tests that try to measure the temperature of your interest. Those tiny probes are prayers disguised as digital noise. When replies are thin or delayed, her mind invents reasons. Busy, distracted, moved on. When there is no reply at all, panic replaces theory. Silence steals certainty and forces imagination to draft stories with no witness. She rehearses messages, deletes them, rewrites them. The drafts folder becomes a private confessional. Sometimes she asks mutual friends about you in casual tones that are anything but casual. Other times she waits for rumors, for a stray update that confirms what she fears or hopes. Rumor is currency when direct answers are unavailable. The absence of explanation breeds myths that serve her fear and vanity equally. That uncertainty is contagious. It seeps into conversations and decisions. She stops trusting first impressions and tests everything for hidden intent. A friendly gesture now triggers a chain reaction of comparison. She measures tone, timing, and restraint as if grading emotional intelligence. Every interaction becomes a stress test. Will this person steady or destabilize? If they destabilize, she recoils. If they steady, she scrutinizes their motives. Her social life becomes a laboratory where experiments begin and rarely end. Even nostalgia is tactical now. She digs up old memories to bolster her case that what you offered was unique. Memory becomes a tool as much as a torment. With each partial confirmation that you're not chasing, an internal alarm sounds louder. Fear is pragmatic. It's about losing a place in someone else's life chart, not just missing a face. She feels stripped of agency. That helplessness pushes her toward action. Those actions are rarely bold. They are small calibrations aimed at reclaiming predictability. Sometimes she lets curiosity win and reaches out in coded ways, test messages that probe without exposing vulnerability. Other times she manufactures chance, frequenting spots you favor, dropping mutual names in conversations. Each tactic has a cost: dignity, pride, or peace. And every failed experiment deepens the ache. This period is messy and strategic at once. She's bargaining with her own pride while trying to see if the door is still cracked. If it's closed, panic settles into grief. If it's ajar, hope reboots and complicates clarity. Either outcome forces her to confront the truth that absence is no longer a temporary argument but a new, enduring condition. She learns the cost of longing. By the time her missing turns into obsession, you have already changed in ways that matter. Your silence has become a boundary she cannot trespass. She reaches, then hesitates, and every attempt reads as proof you might not return. Small messages get swallowed by your quiet. They are echoes with no answer. When she likes an old photo or types a casual, "Hope you're well," the act feels dangerous. Choosing not to respond is not cruelty, it is clarity. That clarity flips the ledger. Where she once held influence, there is now an empty space she cannot fill from the outside. Her attempts prune themselves into half measures because pride and fear collide. You keep building a life that does not revolve around her approval. Decision replaces reaction. You invest in calm instead of chasing drama. This shift exposes what she mistook for normal: your steady presence, the quiet responsibilities you carried. She realizes she traded long-term value for short-term thrill. Recognition is sharp and unwelcome. The angle of regret cuts deeper when she sees you steady, content, and uninterested in proving anything. That sight reframes her memories into accusations against her own choices. She tries to negotiate, through mutuals, through small gestures, through tentative messages, but those tactics feel diminished next to your composed distance. Distance is not absence. It is consequence. It forces her to reckon with loss without the safety net of his immediate reactions. Her old tactics, flirt, provoke, shift the narrative, fall flat because you no longer supply the oxygen they need. Silence becomes a new grammar she must learn to read. Respect, she sees, cannot be manufactured by grand gestures after it has been squandered. You practiced quiet strength. She only now recognizes its value. Humility begins to replace denial, but it is late and costly. She might ask for one more chance, and that request will meet a different man. You will demand accountability and boundaries. You will refuse to return to patterns that once made you vulnerable. Reentry will require terms, work, and time, things she hoped to avoid. Even if she appears repentant, the dynamic will have shifted toward mutual respect rather than unilateral pursuit. Her remorse, however genuine, must now compete with the life you built in absence. Time becomes the creditor that collects the currency of your change. Her chasing, if it comes, proves only that silence worked. It does not guarantee reunion. You have gained clarity, she has gained insight, and with it, urgency and loss. The final victory is internal. You no longer need validation to move forward. Silence wins because it forces truth into daylight. When truth arrives, it often shows a man oriented toward growth and a woman facing the cost of her choices. That outcome is not about revenge, it is about consequence. And consequence, once established, rarely rewinds to what was before. It moves both people forward, though in different directions. You step into projects, friendships, and quiet victories that stack. She inherits a lesson about scarcity, Steady men are rare and consequential, and she remembers it.